Understanding and working with Receiver Storefront. All right, so I've said it before, I'll say it again. Receiver Storefront is kind of like the new web interface. And if you think about it, right, so I have clients that are out here, and these clients need to access the various different kinds of resources that may be available in my Citrix environment. I might have Xenapp servers. I might have Xen desktops. I might even have, regular old device apps, for example. And any of these can be connected to by a client that has the right stuff plugged into it. Well, Web Interface kind of performed this task, but Web Interface is sort of the old way of doing things, and Receiver Storefront now kind of becomes the new way of being the go-between for these clients getting access to all the resources that they need. You can deploy out receiver clients through Receiver Storefront. Users can add applications to their list of available applications in a kind of a shopping interface via Receiver Storefront. So the functionality here is really designed so that you can be very extensible across the large number of products that Citrix has. Now, what's interesting also is that, so let's say you're kind of out here on the internet also. Well, Receiver Storefront is designed also to work behind an access gateway device. So between the internet and your intranet, well, the access gateway is that hardened device that ensures we can securely get into the inside LAN. So you can kind of assume that the LAN exists right here. So all this is designed to facilitate, consistent access no matter where the user may be inside the LAN or outside of the LAN. It's really designed to be that central starting point for user connections. Okay, I'm kind of ignoring access gateway for now. Now, just like with all the naming and all the way that Citrix ends up changing the names all the time, Receiver Storefront can be confused with another product, or really solution, that is called Citrix Cloud Gateway. And these two items here are maybe kind of your cheat sheet for what we're talking about in terms of the differences. So Receiver Storefront is this piece right here. And the Access Gateway, whether the regular version or the VPX version, is the one that sits kind of in the DMZ. And the combination of those two is what we think of in terms of Citrix Cloud Gateway. Okay, there's a free version. This is the Cloud Gateway Express, and then there's the $4 version here, which is the Cloud Gateway Enterprise. So two different sort of variants, which are combinations of different products. The notable add-on product here is App Controller, which we won't really talk about in this series. So Receiver Storefront, built into your, when you download Xenapp, the 6.5 DVD media, it's cooked right into that DVD media, right? It is a role that you can install onto a Xenapp server. Now, what's interesting is that Receiver Storefront and Web Interface are not compatible. And I learned this the hard way in building up all the equipment to do these videos. If you try to install Receiver Storefront over the top of a server that also has Web Interface installed, at some point, maybe not directly after the install, but at some point they will do things that will cause some really weird behavior, and one will absolutely break the other. So do not attempt to co-locate Receiver Storefront and Web Interface, or you're in for a world of hurt. I had to rebuild the whole thing just simply because I couldn't figure out what it did. So don't do that. What I've actually done is installed Receiver Storefront onto XA1, and we'll take a look at actually the installation of that here in just a minute. Now, I have to tell you first and foremost that although Receiver Storefront is a role that you can install as part of the role installation wizard, there's a couple of things you have to be conscious about with the version of Xenapp 6.5 that you're going to download off of Citrix.com. Now, here on XA Nugget 1, if I take a look at the Xenapp Server Role Manager, you can see that I've actually installed the Receiver Storefront role here. Just went to Add Remove Server Roles, clicked on Receiver Storefront, and installed Receiver Storefront. Well, there's a very strange error that occurs in the version that's on the DVD media, so make sure that you get the updated version that is actually installed after that. Okay, so install the role and then install all the updates, and one assumes there will be hot fixes as well between now and then. So make sure you have the right version, or you're going to end up with some really weird MMC problems whenever you attempt to actually edit the configuration. Once it's installed, the next step is really to go through all the different things you need to do to set up your storefront. Now, there are 5 here, and they're kind of designed so that you go from the top to the bottom. You start with authentication, you go through stores, receiver for web, gateways, and then beacons, really. And I've already built the storefront because I'm going to show you what it looks like here, but whenever you first log into this thing, it's going to have little buttons here that you'll take a look at, that you'll click on for, launching the first, configuration for authentication. Same thing for stores. So in each of these are the settings for how you want your storefront to behave. Now, I told you that storefront is like web interface. It participates in both of the different halves that we think of as web interface, the web interface website and the web interface services site. So it's kind of doing both activities at the same time. You have to be very conscious of this when you're actually working with the tool. The first thing you have to do here under authentication is identify which of the methods that you're going to allow for use in authenticating to receiver storefront. That can be username and password. It can be a domain pass-through. Or if you're using the Access Gateway, you're actually going to have to do a pass-through from the Access Gateway because the Access Gateway becomes the point of authentication. Okay, I'm assuming we're all working on LAN here, just simply because it's easier that way. If you do incorporate Access Gateway, be aware that there's a very long installation document that's required. You can, if you want, also manage a merchandising server that you may end up attaching to this. If you're unfamiliar with merchandising server, I've sort of joked throughout the entire series here and in every Citrix series I've ever done about how they always keep changing the names. Well, Citrix realized, I think at some point, that they were causing all kinds of problems with all these names, so a merchandising server appliance is simply just a little appliance that sits in your network somewhere and delivers all the Citrix stuff that you might need, different receiver clients, the different plugins that go with those clients, and so on. So if you have a merchandising server appliance, which you can download, you can actually connect up to it here with Receiver Storefront, and it becomes the device that ends up sending, for example, client updates to clients as they connect, or installing agents onto clients as they connect. And a really useful tool, honestly one of the least recognized, perhaps least well known of Citrix's solutions, but is designed to perform a very important purpose here. So authentication defines how I want to authenticate to my Citrix infrastructure. Once I've done that, then the next thing I have to do is actually identify what stores I want to create. Now, when I create a store is essentially the collection of all of these settings and the orchestration between Receiver Storefront and all the different apps that I'm eventually going to end up collecting on all my Xenapp servers. Right? So if I go back to my little drawing here, right? So here is my Receiver Storefront, here is my Access Gateway, here is my desktop, and then here are all my resources. Well, the store here defines essentially the database that Receiver Storefront uses for collecting all this stuff, and specifically this part of the stuff. You're going to have to create a store here. The store will have a URL that your clients will end up using to connect to it. There will also be a database connection string for essentially getting to the database with all this stuff in there. With that store, one of the first things you'll have to do is identify what server farms you want that store to collect information about. Okay, I have here just the server XA-Nugget1, and I'm using HTTP. I've got my, I'm sharing my XML service port here with IIS because I have that functionality set up. And so this is essentially the server farm that I'm going to collect all of my application metadata from and bring it into the store. This will make more sense when I show you what the client looks like. I can enable remote access as well if I've connected up with an access gateway server. And interestingly enough, I can even integrate this store in with the Citrix online products like GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, and GoToTraining. So if you have those in your environment, you may want to make those available to users through this, again, single storefront that provides access to all of these applications. Now, when I'm done with all of these settings here, there is this mechanism that I can use to export out a provisioning file that you end up distributing to users that will automate the connection of their receiver client to this storefront. If I hit the export button here, it'll export it as a .cr file, a Citrix receiver file, and then it will allow me to distribute that through whatever mechanism I see fit. I can email it to them, I can use an application delivery method, whatever you feel you need to do. Also, if you have legacy clients, those that aren't compatible with the storefront way of doing things, you can actually make a program neighborhood agent or PN agent, the old web interface URL way of doing this, available as well. Okay, so this actually is very close to what the program neighborhood agent string was whenever we were connecting back up to web interface. In fact, if I just bring up my little pen here, when you're looking at this URL, in fact, if I get rid of the store here, this is the original URL that web interface actually used. Receiver Storefront added in that extra little path in there for what the store name is. So be conscious of that. Again, if you have older legacy clients, you're not really ready to move into the storefront way of doing things, you can actually make that available. I also told you that back in the web interface days, there was a Citrix website and a Citrix services site. And web interface had, you would go to a website to access your applications, or you could just use the client and the services site to have the services site populate the client with all the different apps that it required. In fact, let me just show you that so that you're aware of what the differences are. If I go over here on XA2 and take a look at Web Interface Management, I have a web services site. I haven't built one, but I have the ability to build one, and also a Xenapp services site here. Now, this roughly maps to what we're seeing here when we take a look at Receiver for Web. So the store operates functionally as the services site, whereas Receiver for Web operates as the website. So when I create a Receiver for Web site, what I'm effectively doing is creating an actual website that users can go to access their applications, just like a Xenapp website. Now you'll notice here that the URL is slightly different. Instead of it being Citrix/store, here for Receiver for Web, it's Citrix/store web. Okay, and that's the URL I'll actually have to copy to the clipboard here and navigate to when I want to actually connect up from some remote location that hasn't got a receiver that's configured appropriately yet. Okay. Again, more of this will make sense when we see the client. Then lastly, we have down here gateways and beacons. So I'm not connecting up through an access gateway, but if I was, this would allow me to set up the connection to that access gateway, and then also identify some public addresses, some public IP addresses that a receiver can use as a beacon to identify when a client sits on the far side of the network, out on the WAN somewhere, out on the internet, as opposed to here inside the LAN. It's kind of a neat idea. Because if a client can actually resolve a specific address that that client should not be able to resolve from the internet, well, then if it resolves that address correctly, well, that proves that the client is on the LAN and has a LAN address. So useful tool, again, for identifying where that client exists, inside or outside. In this case, we're just building one that's built for the LAN, so we don't really have to worry about beacons because the assumption is we're not going through an access gateway at this point. So with Storefront in place, okay, the store there is simply going to enumerate whatever applications we've generated here within Citrix App Center. I have, well, one app, Citrix App Center. And if I went through and created more apps, they would just appear. I'm not going to do that. But the way in which users end up connecting up into all of this stuff starts really from the web. Let me flip back here to our Windows 7 computer. We used this computer earlier to show essentially how that connection works with the Instant App Access feature. And if I take a look at the receiver client here under Preferences, under Plugin Status, I will show that I am actually enabled, the online plugin is enabled. I don't actually have any active sessions. Okay, the pre-launch timeout has actually occurred, so I don't have those active sessions that I'm connecting up into. And in fact, this client, if I take a look at the server, is plugged into Xenapp 2. So I'm actually using the web interface site to enumerate the applications on this client. And if I take a look here at the Start menu, All Programs, there's that Citrix App Center. That's a remote app. So what I want to do is convert this client over to using Receiver. Now, when I do that, there are a couple different ways you can do that, and I'll show you kind of the easiest way, and then I'll kind of direct you to some of the Citrix documentation for some of the more centrally managed ways in which you can accomplish this. Obviously, you can simply go down here to change server and then repopulate the new server address in here for Storefront. Okay, that would be Xenapp 1, and I believe it's Citrix/store would be how we would do it here. But what I really want to show you is one of the new functionalities that's built into Receiver that makes provisioning all these settings just a little bit easier. So let's go back here into Internet Explorer. I'm a regular user, and I want to connect up to Receiver. Well, let's actually punch in the Xenapp 1 Citrix Store Web. So I'm going to the Web Services site, to use the old parlance. What I'm doing is connecting up into Citrix Receiver here, Receiver Storefront here, and if I punch in my username and password, there's my username, there's my password, it's actually going to log me into Receiver Storefront. So interesting difference here between what we saw, well, in Web Interface and now what we see here in Receiver Storefront. Now, check it out. If I want, I have a list of applications that I can choose from and just simply add the Citrix App Center or whatever application I want into the list of those that are available here in my store. Really neat. This gives my users now the ability to identify which apps they want and just filter through the ones that they don't care about. What's also really cool is down here at the bottom, it's easy to miss. It's called Activate Citrix Receiver for your desktop. Now what it allows you to do is with an installed instance of Receiver, you can click the Activate button here to have it essentially download that same CR file that we were going to download via the export tool that I showed you earlier inside the Receiver Storefront admin console. And this CR file essentially configures this client so that it talks to this Receiver Storefront and uses the services way of doing things as opposed to the web way of doing things. Again, if you don't feel like deploying it out through some automated tool, this provides another mechanism for you to give your clients, your users, the ability to do it themselves. And that's really all there is to know here as it relates to Receiver Storefront. The users now can click in and access their applications. The desktops, if you have desktops via Xen desktops, those can be made available here as well. This is essentially, as I said before, the starting point for users' access to all the applications, data, and apps, and even some mobile apps, depending on what version of Storefront you have, that you want to make available to them. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've really talked about the very introductory foundations of Receiver Storefront. And admittedly, I've kind of glossed over quite a few of the topics here simply because this version of Receiver Storefront that we have here right out of the box is one that's probably not ready yet for prime time in your organization. As Citrix releases Cloud Gateway version 2 and all the new advancements that are going to be released with that, you are going to spend more time with Storefront. But for now, you probably will kind of stick with Web Interface, at least for the time being. And important also to recognize is that Web Interface, Receiver Storefront, this version, and the Instant App Access function, again with this specific version, those two items are actually incompatible as well. So spend some time with this tool. Understand that it intends to be Citrix's new technology for replacing web access. Recognize that there are two different versions of it. well, try not to merge the two of them, web interface and receiver storefront, together, and then also spend some time actually interacting with it. Get it installed, get prepared for it, get yourself comfortable with this technology, because for now, at least, this is where we see Citrix going into the future. But until then, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.